The moment he laughed right there in my courtroom, in front of everyone, I knew this case was going to be one I would never forget. If stories like this one speak to you, stories about justice, accountability, and the people who fight for both, go ahead and subscribe to this channel right now. You belong here. Before I begin, I want you to know that this is a dramatized story inspired by real courtroom lessons. The names, places, and people in this story are entirely fictional. This is not a real case, a real judge, or a real legal record. It is a legal story created to explore themes of responsibility, humility, and what justice truly means. I have sat on the bench for a long time, long enough to have seen people at their very best and their very worst. And I have learned something important over the years. The law is not simply a set of rules carved in stone. It is a living thing, shaped by the people who stand inside it and the choices they make when no one is watching. Before I tell you about Marcus Hale, I want to share a moment from years earlier. A young man came before me, 19 years old, charged with stealing food from a convenience store. He had taken bread, a small jar of peanut butter, and a carton of milk. He had a younger sister at home. Their mother had just lost her job. He looked at me that morning like he expected the world to crush him. I did not dismiss the charge. The law still had to be acknowledged. But I gave him a suspended sentence, required community service at a local food bank, and connected him with a support program. He left that courtroom standing tall. 3 years later, he sent me a letter. He had finished his associate degree and was working in social services. He said that day in court was the day he decided someone still believed in him. I tell you that story because justice is not one size fits all. It requires wisdom. It requires compassion. And it requires the courage to look at the full picture before you speak. Now let me tell you about Marcus Hale. If this story is keeping you with me so far, drop a comment below and tell me, do you think powerful people should be held to a higher standard? I read as many of your thoughts as I can. Marcus Hale was the founder and chief executive of a logistics company called Billionaire Solutions, based in the fictional city of Ashfield. He had built that company from a small operation into one of the largest distribution networks in the region. By the time he walked into Hargrove County Court, his personal wealth was estimated at over $3 billion. He arrived that first morning in a tailored charcoal suit. 2 junior attorneys flanked him on either side. His lead counsel, a sharp and polished man named Thomas Reed, carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from winning too many times in rooms like mine. The case had been brought by a group of 31 former employees of Billionaire Solutions. Their representative in court was a woman named Elena Voss. She was 43 years old, a mother of 2 teenage children, and had worked at Vantara's main warehouse facility for 9 years. She sat at the plaintiff's table every single morning of that trial with a yellow notepad in front of her and a quiet kind of strength that filled the room without making any noise. The allegations were serious. The plaintiffs claimed that Billionaire Solutions had deliberately ignored repeated safety violations inside their main distribution center. Workers had raised concerns about faulty equipment, overloaded shelving systems, and chemical storage areas that did not meet basic safety requirements. Management had allegedly dismissed every complaint. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in late autumn, a section of industrial shelving collapsed inside the warehouse. 11 workers were injured, 3 of them seriously. Elena Voss was one of those 3. The lawsuit claimed that Marcus Hale himself had known about these safety problems for over a year before the incident. And not only had he failed to fix them, the lawsuit alleged he had actively worked to hide the evidence that he knew. Stay with me, because this is where the story gets very important. The first week of the trial was what you might expect in a high-profile courtroom drama. Thomas Reed made opening arguments that were smooth and carefully constructed. He painted Billionaire Solutions as a responsible company that had suffered an unforeseeable accident. He called it a tragedy, not a failure. He said the company had already offered settlements and expressed deep regret. He said Marcus Hale was a man who cared deeply about his employees. Marcus Hale sat beside him through all of it with his arms crossed and a slight smile on his face. Not the smile of a man who is nervous. The smile of a man who believed this was already over. The prosecuting attorney was a woman named Sarah Moran. She was quiet in her delivery, but precise. Every question she asked landed exactly where she intended it. She called former warehouse supervisors to the stand. Each one described the same pattern: safety complaints logged, then dismissed. Equipment reported as broken, then marked as inspected without any actual repair. Workers told to keep quiet or risk losing their shifts. One supervisor, a man named Gerald Tatum, testified that he had personally emailed Marcus Hale's office 14 months before the incident with a detailed list of hazardous conditions. He said he never received a direct reply. What he received instead was a call from a human resources manager telling him to stop sending those kinds of emails and to route all concerns through an internal form system that, he claimed, led nowhere. As Gerald Tatum finished speaking, I noticed something. The courtroom got quiet. Not the ordinary quiet of people listening, but the deep, charged kind of silence that settles in a room when people suddenly understand something they did not understand before. Even the attorneys went still for a moment. Jurors leaned slightly forward. I watched one of them write something down and then look up at Marcus Hale. Hale did not look back at the juror. He was looking at the table in front of him, smoothing a crease in his sleeve. If this story is resonating with you, share it with someone who believes in fairness, because these stories deserve to be heard beyond the screen. Sarah Moran then presented the documented record of safety complaints filed over an 18-month period before the warehouse incident. 37 separate written reports. Not one resulted in a formal safety review. She entered these documents into evidence with methodical calm. Each document told a small piece of the same story, and together they told a story that was very hard to argue against. Thomas Reed tried. He argued that large companies receive hundreds of internal communications every day and that no executive could personally respond to each one. He brought in an operational consultant who testified about standard corporate management structures. It was a reasonable defense on the surface. And if the case had ended there, things might have looked different. But they did not end there, because of the twist that I have not told you about yet. Several weeks before the trial began, Sarah Moran's team had submitted a formal request for internal communications from Vantera Solutions, specifically emails, memos, and digital records related to the warehouse facility. What came back was a carefully organized set of documents, all of which seemed to support the company's position. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. But one of the junior members of Sarah Moran's legal team, a young attorney named David Chu, noticed something. There were gaps. Small gaps in the email threads. Dates that did not line up correctly. Reply chains that seemed to start in the middle. David Chu flagged it. Sarah Moran took it to a forensic digital investigator. What that investigator found changed everything. 11 emails had been deleted from the corporate server. Not archived. Not filed elsewhere. Deleted. But digital data is stubborn. It leaves traces even when someone tries to erase it. And through careful forensic recovery, those 11 emails were partially reconstructed. I want you to follow the channel so you never miss a moment like the one I am about to share with you, because this is the kind of detail that defines an entire case. The reconstructed emails showed a direct thread between Marcus Hale and two of his senior operations managers. The thread was dated 14 months before the warehouse incident, nearly the same time that Gerald Tatum had filed his safety report. In those emails, Marcus Hale had been informed, in clear and direct language, that the warehouse shelving units in Sector C and Sector D were operating beyond their rated load capacity. A safety engineer had flagged them as a potential collapse risk. Marcus Hale's response, recovered and presented to the court in writing, contained 5 words that I will not forget. Handle it quietly. No paperwork. A second recovered message, sent 3 days later, instructed his operations team to, and I am quoting directly, make sure nothing official goes on record about this until after the Q3 audit closes. When Sarah Moran read those words aloud in my courtroom, the silence that fell was unlike anything I had heard in years of cases. It was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of recognition. The kind that settles over a room when something that everyone suspected but could not prove is finally placed into the light. I looked at Marcus Hale. For the first time since the trial began, the smile was gone. He sat very still, his hands folded on the table, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere in the middle distance. Thomas Reed leaned close to him and whispered something. Hale did not respond. He did not move. Whatever confidence had carried him into that courtroom was no longer there. Elena Voss, sitting at the plaintiff's table, pressed her hands flat against her notepad. Her eyes were closed. She was breathing slowly. I could see her shoulders rise and fall. The jury needed very little time. But before I tell you the verdict, I want to pause and explain what was going through my mind as I prepared to deliver the sentence and my own statements to the court. Because sentencing is never something I rush, even when the evidence is overwhelming, even when the behavior described is difficult to look at without frustration. If you have watched this far and you want to see justice fully served, stay until the very end. The closing words of this case carry the lesson that matters most. I thought about Elena Voss and the 30 other workers who had spent years doing honest work in a facility that their employer knew was not safe. I thought about the 3 years of recovery some of them still faced. I thought about Gerald Tatum, who had done exactly what he was supposed to do. He reported the danger through proper channels and had been told, in effect, to be quiet. I thought about the law itself. The law is very clear on this point. When a company's leadership has direct, documented knowledge of a safety hazard and chooses not to address it, and then chooses to suppress the evidence of that knowledge, that is not an accident. That is not a management oversight. That is a deliberate decision that puts human beings at risk. The law calls it negligence at a severe level, and depending on the circumstances, it can rise into territory that is far more serious. I also thought about Marcus Hale as a person, not as a symbol of wealth or arrogance, but as a human being who had made a choice, perhaps more than one. I do not believe that people are defined entirely by their worst decisions, but I do believe that decisions like these, decisions that prioritize money and appearances over the safety of real people, cannot be treated as minor. The community depends on courts like mine to say clearly that this kind of behavior has real consequences. That accountability is not optional. That the law protects workers just as much as it protects business owners. The jury returned a verdict of liability on all primary counts. In my sentencing and instructions, I ordered Van Era Solutions to pay full compensatory damages to all 31 plaintiffs, with Elena Voss and the 2 other most seriously injured workers receiving substantially higher amounts to reflect the severity of their ongoing recovery. I also ordered the company to fund an independent safety review of all its facilities, to be conducted by an outside agency with no ties to Van Era, and to implement a mandatory safety reporting system with full legal protection for any employee who files a concern. As for Marcus Hale personally, I held him individually accountable. He was found in violation of his duty of care as a corporate officer. He was required to pay a significant personal financial penalty. He was barred from serving as a chief executive or board director of any company in this jurisdiction for 5 years. And I required him to personally fund a worker safety education initiative in Ashfield that would operate for a minimum of 3 years, serving both current employees and students entering the workforce. I looked at him before I finished, and I said something I want to share with you now. I said, "You are not being punished for being successful, Mr. Hale. You are being held accountable for the specific moment when you chose secrecy over safety and convenience over the lives of people who trusted your company with their time, their labor, and their well-being. Wealth does not make you untouchable under this law. It never has. And as long as I sit in this seat, it never will." He nodded once, quietly. There was no smile. There was no argument from Thomas Reed. There was only the sound of the room settling around a verdict that had been a long time coming. Elena Voss let out a slow breath. I saw her reach across the table and take the hand of the attorney beside her. She did not cry out. She did not celebrate. She simply sat there with her eyes closed for a moment, as if she was trying to fully understand that what had just happened was real. In the hallway afterward, I was told she stood quietly by a window for several minutes before she spoke to anyone. When she finally did, she said she did not feel victorious. She said she felt tired and relieved and ready to heal. That, to me, is what justice served actually looks like. It is not loud. It is not a celebration. It is the quiet weight of something difficult finally being set down. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. I would genuinely love to know what moments stood out to you most. I think about this case whenever someone asks me whether the law can really hold powerful people accountable. My answer is always the same: yes, but only when the people inside the system do their jobs with courage and care. David Chu noticed those gaps in the email records when it would have been very easy to overlook them. Sarah Moran pushed forward when a lesser attorney might have accepted the edited documents and moved on. Gerald Tatum told the truth on that witness stand, even knowing that it cost him something to do so. This is the lesson I carry with me from this courtroom drama, and I hope it is one that stays with you too. Power does not protect you from the truth. It only determines how long the truth takes to surface. And in my experience, the truth always surfaces eventually. The law exists precisely for that reason. It exists to create a space where hiding is harder than being honest, and where the evidence, however deeply someone tries to bury it, can still be found by the people willing to look. Accountability and compassion are not opposites. You can hold someone fully responsible for what they did while still believing that they are capable of change. That is what I believe about Marcus Hale. The penalty was real. The consequences were real. But so is the possibility that somewhere in all of this, a man with extraordinary resources finally understood that those resources come with an extraordinary responsibility. I do not know what happens after someone leaves my courtroom. I only know what happens inside it. And inside it, on the day that verdict was read, the law did exactly what it was built to do. It protected 31 people who had no other protection. It said clearly that no amount of money gives anyone the right to treat human lives as acceptable losses. And it reminded everyone in that room, attorneys, jurors, gallery observers, and one very quiet billionaire, that fairness is not a courtesy the law extends to the powerful. It is a right the law owes to everyone. Thank you for sitting with me through this legal story today. If it made you think, made you feel something, or reminded you of something important about the world you live in, then it did exactly what I hoped it would do. Follow along for more stories like this one, because there are many more cases waiting to be told, and each one carries a lesson worth hearing. Until then, remember this: the courtroom is not just a building, it is a promise. A promise that no matter who you are, what you own, or what you believe you can get away with, the law sees you clearly, and justice, when it is served with both wisdom and humanity, does not flinch. Court is adjourned.